Hello. Today we are going to do a little experiment, which is I have often been known to comment that bemoan, maybe bemoan might be a better verb here, bemoan the fact that I feel like the UK tends to always have better covers for their books than the US does. Now, I will say, in theory, the reason that the US versus the UK have different covers is because of marketing preferences between those two consumer bases, / the fact that sometimes there are different publishers in the US versus the UK, or the US versus other countries. I should also mention, obviously this is focused on the US because I am an American, so those are the covers I tend to see. So totally granting that a different booktuber probably would have a different perspective of what their baseline was, but I'm American, so that's kind of I can't change that. That's just, those are the books I tend to see. Those are what are mostly marketed to me. So anyway, in theory, that is the reason why there are different covers. But so often I personally am like, okay, I'm an American, and in theory, publishing company, you're trying to market to my sensibilities. Why are you failing so spectacularly when I look over and see what the UK has and realize that those are so much more appealing? So obviously, beautiful cover does not always equal a fantastic book, but it is kind of one of the first impressions readers get. So I do think it's interesting to kind of analyze or think this through. So I wanted to develop somewhat of a random sample, but controlling for the fact that since these are marketing materials, I want to make sure that they are books that I would be interested in. They are somehow already appealing to me, so it's not a book that I would be unlikely to pick up that I'm evaluating. So I decided that the best way to have somewhat of a random-ish sample that was still targeted towards my taste was to go through the books that I have read in the last few months, and literally I just kind of went through major, non-indie releases, because often indie books just have the same cover no matter what, and I went through and just kind of went one by one to see if I could find books that had different covers in the US versus the UK. Now, a couple of caveats. One, caveats and findings. Interesting finding is that I've found that mainstream published romances do not tend to have different covers nearly as often as other genres that I read. You will see almost no covers for romances. I think there's only one in here, and that is because they seem to be having pretty consistent covers in the US versus the UK. So I thought that was an interesting finding. Much more likely to have a different cover if it's nonfiction, mystery, or fantasy, which are some of my other big things that I tend to read. So I thought that was interesting. And then a caveat here. So I believe that these are all UK editions. I used Book Depository to try to validate that these were the UK editions because that is where that company is based. However, there is a chance that some of these are just international covers they're non-US covers. So I want to say that there is a chance that I have pulled, a cover for New Zealand or Australia or something, thinking that it was a UK cover. So I'm gonna caveat this by saying it's the UK/international version. It is the non-US cover, basically. Okay, so I pulled 10 books based on that methodology, and then we're gonna just see, in that sampling, how many times do I prefer the UK versus how many times do I prefer the US? And my hypothesis is that I generally prefer the UK over the US one when there is a difference, but we're about to find out if that's true. Okay, so the first one we have is a sci-fi romance, and I think this is the only romance. I guess there's one other technically that's kind of a romance. Anyway, we're starting with Nalini Singh's Kiss of Snow. I'm gonna have the US edition on this side of the screen, and I'll put the UK versions / the international versions on this side. So in the head-to-head here, if you know my sensibilities but at all, you know that I vastly prefer the UK/international edition over this. I am somebody who personally does not like the shirtless dudes and the clinch on my romance covers, particularly for this series. I feel like that this is actually kind of misleading on the tone of these books, and I think it's not surprising that in the US, we evolved away from this style of cover around I think it's the 12th book in the series. They started making the covers less romance in their kind of marketing read because they do have an audience outside of just romance readers. So in this one, this is a very clear winner for me, which is the UK versus international. I like that it's more minimalist. It still is character focused, which I know not everybody loves, but I'm okay with that. I like that it's just a little bit less. It still to me does say romance because it has a character face and it's sort of like a good looking guy, but it's not as sort of overt or intense. And I think you could have somebody who did not think of themselves themselves as a romance reader who would potentially be interested in the book based on the marketing. So this one, clear winner for the UK. Okay, next we have a recent thriller release, which is While Justice Sleeps by Stacey Abrams. So this is a political thriller, and I have noticed in pulling these samples that the UK has a much more stripped back approach to their mystery slash thriller covers often. And I'm going to say that in this case, I actually very much prefer the US edition. I think that the kind of like Lady Justice being blind very much plays into the thematic content of this. And the cover I think actually is somewhat special or unique to the book. Whereas I feel like the UK edition to me feels a little bit more generic and doesn't really tell you a lot about some of what's happening in the book the way that the US one does. So I'm actually gonna say, I definitely prefer the US one, and I can also tell you just from owning it, this particular book has very lovely pages in it, so it's also just nice as an object to feel. So, we've got one for the US. All right, next we have sort of I'm gonna call this like a gothic boarding school horror type book. This is sort of like a mystery horror type story. And this is a case where I actually specifically ordered the UK edition because I vastly preferred its cover over the US one. I think that the US one just feels kind of bland and maybe sort of like a minimalist take on a Rebecca type cover, which I guess makes sense because I do think that this is a book that is thinking of itself in the same sort of vein as Rebecca, like it's that kind of a book. So I guess in terms of the marketing, possibly what it was communicating is effective in the sense of correctly communicating the tone, but I just love the kind of graphic approach of this, like the sort of, you know, the same little lady figure, and then we have the one who's facing in a different way, in a different color. I just feel like that kind of communicates both sort of like thematically what's happening and overall just like as an image, I find this one more pleasing. So obviously this is one where I clearly prefer the UK edition because I went out of my way to buy it from Book Depository. Okay, so this one is an interesting head-to-head because I thought that this was an interesting example of where the cover is almost identical, but the only difference is the font treatment. And I have to say that I think in terms of correctly communicating the type of tone this book has, what I believe is the US cover has a more appropriate font treatment because it is very whimsical. It's communicating that sort of lightness of touch that TJ Klune's writing style has. Now, I'm fairly sure that the UK one that I'm showing you is for the UK because I found it on a Waterstones exclusive edition, but it's interesting to me that the only thing that they changed was the font, and that I do think that they made like a decidedly backward step in choosing the font. Not that it's terrible, but just in terms of like as a marketing tool and communicating a tone, to me this is decidedly not as effective. So anyway, I just thought it was interesting that the only thing they changed was one of the things I thought really worked about US edition. So this is a very similar cover, but I am gonna give the edge to the US on this one. And then next we have Ship of Magic by Robin Hobb. Now this is another one where it's pretty obvious which one I'm gonna pick because I went out of my way to order the UK/international edition versus what the US has. Now, I will say, I just love this entire line of Robin Hobb books from the UK/international edition. I just think that these are beautiful and the clearly superior cover design, in my opinion. But there are people who really like this style of fantasy cover that the US version of this book has. The kind of more drawn character cover is definitely something that there's like a tradition of that kind of art style in fantasy cover design, and it's something that some people really, really love. My friend Leanna, for example, I know that she actually has a soft spot for this kind of style of fantasy cover. For me, I feel about that style of fantasy cover very similarly to how I feel about the kind of older school romance covers, which is just like there is a kind of nostalgic campiness to them in some way. But I think as a marketing tool to modern sensibilities, I personally don't find them that appealing. So I know that there's some people who actually quite like this version, but for me, I very much prefer this one. So this is gonna be another one for the UK. Okay, next we have Year One from Nora Roberts. I'm gonna tell you that I'm pretty torn on this one because I kind of like both of them about the same. I will say that in the US, this font treatment is pretty specific to Nora Roberts. Like I've seen this type of font for several of her books. So I think that that is part of her branding, at least with this publisher. Both of these, you know, have the imagery of the crow, which is definitely a part of the book. I think that the UK/international edition is a little bit more sort of like graphic art kind of style. It feels more like a silhouette versus this feels more like a drawing. I'm not really sure which one I like better. I guess I would say maybe I prefer the US one just because I do like that there's this sort of Celtic imagery kind of inlaid on it, and I do like that Nora Roberts has her own branding, whereas it feels like the UK one is a little bit more generic. So I'm narrowly gonna give this to the US. So we continue to be tied. By the way, I did not put these in any particular order. This is purely happenstance, but so far we're seeing that my hypothesis does not seem to be as true as I thought it was. Anyway, let's move on to Circe. So I believe that the cover I'm showing you, I think is the UK edition. It may just be the international one, but I think it's the UK. And from what I can tell, they do both have the foiling, which if you know me, you know I love. This version also has deckled edges. I won't count that in my reckoning since I'm not sure if the other version has deckled edges, which for me is a plus. I did find on a recent live stream that many people hate deckled edges, which was a shock to me. Anyway, so again, this is one that I'm pretty split on because I actually quite like both of these designs a lot. I love that rich copper element to the design. I think that both of them communicate sort of like the fact that this is historical fiction pretty well, but I am gonna actually give this one to the US because I do like the image of sort of the Greek character face. I think that this communicates more specifically what kind of historical fiction this is. And again, with like the font choice and the sort of little detailing, I think that you can tell by looking at this that this is like based on Greek god history more easily than the UK one. So I'm gonna actually give the edge to the US. So US is pulling ahead. Okay, next we have a thriller, which is How to Kill Your Best Friend by Lexi Elliott. And again, I think that these are pretty similar in their concept. Both of them are trying to evoke a beach. But again, we see that the UK, I have noticed, has a lot more of these sort of more generic thriller titles. Like they all seem to have very similar font treatments, and they have like some unique imaging to them, but not as much. And actually in this case, I feel like the US one feels more special to the book itself. I like some of the sort of like dripping details on the font, which is communicating like water, you know, making the ink bleed. I think that's cool. So I'm gonna say that I like the US's better. In this case, it feels more unique or special to the book versus the UK's one. I am shocked, guys. Right now, US is ahead. So best case scenario, we have a tie, but US may win. I am so surprised. Okay, so now we have a middle grade title, which is The Lost Hero by Rick Riordan. And both of these I actually like quite a bit. I'm kind of conflicted about this. So again, we do see that the UK has a little bit more of sort of like a photorealism kind of vibe it's going for, versus in the US, we do have these sort of iconic in the sense of they're very recognizable. This particular artist who does Percy Jackson / Rick Riordan, the Riordan versus drawings. You can't really see it, but I have a signed print that artist did. So I actually do like both of these approaches. I think they're both effective, but I do feel like US's feels a little bit more unique and special. So I'm gonna give it to the US. What? What is happening? I'm so surprised. And then the last one I have is In a Dark, Dark Wood by Ruth Ware. And these, I again am kind of torn on because they're different approaches to the cover design. Both of them, though, I think are going for sort of simple covers with sort of a graphic feel to them. The US one, I think, is specifically trying to evoke sort of like a Blair Witch Project kind of horror forest vibe, whereas I think the UK one is going for more of that sort of like graphic artist simple with the really bright green, which I think is more maybe eye-catching. This is one where I honestly could kind of go either way because I actually like both of these covers, but in terms of communicating something specific about the book, I am gonna say I think the US's is better. I am beyond shocked, guys. I was confident that the lesson from this was going to be that I like the UK versions better. So I will say, okay, while I pick my jaw up off the floor, because we have a clear winner for this American reader, that the marketing and like what the covers are doing, the US ones do work better for me in general than the UK/international one. So I think lesson is that even, that maybe the US publishers and their cover design departments are doing a better job than I was giving them credit for. Okay, I will eat crow on that. I will say maybe what I've taken away from this is that when I prefer the UK one, I strongly prefer it and like go out of my way to get a copy of it. Like I am collecting those international/UK editions of the Nalini Singh Side Changeling books because I just so much prefer that treatment for the earlier books that are only available in trade paperback. Like I vastly prefer that. I am collecting that Robin Hobb series. You can see that on my shelves. And then I went out of my way to order that copy of Madam from Book Depository because I so much preferred the UK versus the US's. So I guess maybe like the takeaway is when I like the UK one, I like it much more. And then a lot of the ones that are sort of toss-ups for me, I guess I slightly give the edge to the US because it seems like maybe their cover design departments are more likely to create something that feels a little less generic and a little more specific to the book. It seems like the UK has more, at least of the ones that I sampled, had more kind of somewhat generic feeling titles or like covers that I think are effective and quite nice. Like I didn't dislike any of the UK ones, whereas I do dislike some of the US ones. They all felt nice, but they didn't feel as specific. So maybe like maybe the US is just like going for it more, and when they miss, they really miss for me. Maybe that's the takeaway. I don't know. I'm so surprised. So let me know what you thought. If you have had similar thoughts to me, do you agree with my picks, my head-to-head choices of cover designs? Do you have a preference between them? Did you agree, disagree, etc.? I'm gonna have to stop saying that I always prefer the UK editions now. That's my big takeaway. I'm thinking of some of the ones that I do love from the UK in particular. I have some beautiful covers from there, but maybe as a whole, they're not as superior as I have been saying. That will do it for me. If you like this video, please like, subscribe, follow me on the social medias if you are so inclined. I have all that information listed in the description box below, including a link to my merch shop if you want to get this cute sweatshirt. That is below. And yeah, I think that does it for this video. I hope you guys are having an absolutely lovely day today, and I will just talk to you soon. Bye!